And here we go with the central nervous system, the brain. I'm really going to spend pretty much all the time on the brain. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord, but the brain is cool. So if the brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple that we couldn't. That's Lyle Watson. Another one I like. Oh, here's another one I like. I used to think that the brain was the most interesting part of the body until I realized what was making me think that. All right, so let's talk about the wonderful gushy brain and a few myths about it first. Where does that myth come from that we only use 10% of our brain? There's no truth to that whatsoever. Brains are expensive. They use 30% of our energy. So we're not going to use all of that energy just for something we only use 10% of. And there are some areas that if you lose a few very small areas, a few cells, you're dead. Or there are sometimes that people have literally lost half a hemisphere or been born without a cerebellum and they're okay. But brains are expensive. This is a cool one. During fetal development, at some times during fetal development, you are building about 50,000 neurons per second. So that's cool. Now, going back to how some people can lose big parts of the brain, and the younger you are when you lose it, the better able you are to overcome that. This was recent. There's a 44-year-old with an IQ of 75, which is low, but not that far away from, normal is considered 80 to 120, with literally almost no brain tissue. So the brain is very, very adaptable. And if you're missing one part, especially when it happens when you're young, another part can take over that function. Myth number 2, the brain isn't solid tissue. Don't slice into the brain with a scalpel. It's goo, it's gush. It's the consistency of cold oatmeal or warm tofu or toothpaste. So size, in this case, doesn't really matter. Neanderthals had bigger brains. Men have bigger brains than women. So clearly it doesn't matter. It's because they have bigger skulls. So it's what you do with it more than what size it is. Another myth, that memories are accurate. So a flashbulb memory, you know where you are, you remember exactly when you saw that car accident. And we think that these memories are precise and detailed and persistent, and oh my goodness, they are not at all. They've done many, many studies, and they're really actually moving away from eyewitness testimony because it's so inaccurate. You can plant memories in somebody. And have you ever been at a party with somebody and you were both there viewing the same thing, and the next day you had completely different versions of the exact same experience? So memories are not precise, they do change, and you can implant one, and they're not all that detailed either. It's all downhill after 40, well, to some degree. All right, so young people are better at language acquisition. You're really hard to lose a language once you get older. If you learn a few languages when you're young, you get to keep them more. Memorizing random words, counting backwards by 7, always a really important skill. Some things are really best when you're young. 26 is the optimal age for your brain. So you've got a couple years, and then it's all going to start going downhill for you too. Now, what older people tend to be better at, vocabulary, maybe we've had more time on this earth to learn more words, judging character and social wisdom. That's experience, settling conflicts, regulating your own emotions. So more of this emotional intelligence. So you may forget some words, but you don't mind as much maybe that you're forgetting the words. Another myth, that we have 5 senses. I don't know why we keep saying this. So sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. Did I get that? Yes. But there are more than that. Proprioception. So the sensation of where your body is in space and where it's moving, that is a sense. It has an organ in the inner ear. I don't know why we don't count that. How about 2 of them? So proprioception and vestibular. The sense of time we think is located in the basal ganglia. So, and that is, think about it, and look at an apple. An apple would just be a series of different sensations without your sense of time telling you that they're all happening at the same moment. How do you know when you're standing in the shower to get out after, 7 minutes rather than staying in there for 28 hours? You have a sense of time. Some people estimate that we have a dozen or more senses, but we tend to call it just 5. Another myth is that brains are like computers. There are some things computers do that our brains just can't, but we design the computers. But brains are just better, you know? When you put more information into a computer, it runs more slowly. All right, now I'm looking at my computer and I have like literally 40 windows open. Why am I doing that? But when you put more information into a brain, you can calculate things maybe more quickly. And computers can't deal with a power failure. They don't laugh at a joke. They don't write a poem about how they feel. Brains are amazing. There's a myth that the brain is hardwired. Now, it is true that certain areas are specialized for certain tasks, but the brain is what we call very plastic. It's very changeable. It's beautifully, amazingly changeable. So blind people, if you are born blind, the parts of the brain, the occipital lobe that normally process sight, can then be developed, can be devoted to hearing. So some people who are blind do have a hyperacute sense of hearing. The younger you are when you lose your vision, the more you get to get that. So if as an adult you lose your vision, you don't tend to have that. But if you're born blind or lose your vision as a young age, yeah, you do see that. Phantom limb pain. If you lose an arm or a leg or a limb, other areas of the body can take over that brain area for that lost area. That might be why you feel pain in your foot, because it's actually getting sensation from another area that you still have. What else? Myth that we see the world as it is. How are we? So what is that? Two people, somebody's going to see a face, and somebody's going to see a vase, and somebody's going to see faces. So it's all open to interpretation. And I have a couple of videos for you, and I never know if YouTube is going to make me take them down for copyright. So if they do, I will just post the links on Canvas, and I will just cut it here, but let's see how we do.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
So did you notice that? Maybe you knew about that one already, but most people don't see it. All right, let's look at another.
Our perception of the world around us is strongly linked to our vision, but how do you know what you're seeing is real? Can you really trust your eyes? Take, for example, these two gray rectangular columns, both of which are different shades of gray. Or are they? It turns out that they're the exact same, and yet, even after knowing the illusion is there, your eyes refuse to see them as the same. Introducing colors produces the same result. I promise, no trick photography or editing effects have been applied. In fact, if you look up the Munker white illusion, you'll come across many more examples. Examine them in Photoshop, and you can see that the colors are the exact same. A similar effect can be seen with this checkerboard illusion. Tile A clearly seems darker than tile B, but you know better by now, right? Even though your eyes can't see it, you know when I remove the surrounding imagery, the tiles will be the same color. So what's going on here? The truth is that scientists don't fully understand this phenomenon, and there are many complex biological and neurological factors taking place. Ultimately, our brains judge color and brightness in context. In other words, our brains compare the surrounding environment in order to create our perception. The purpose of our senses, or eyes in this case, is not to provide us with an absolute color or physical property of our external reality, but to interpret what we see as efficiently as possible in order to interact with our environment most appropriately. The tile illusion takes advantage of this phenomenon. Our brains know that shadows make objects look darker. As a result, the brain compensates by interpreting the tile as being lighter than it appears, until we take the shadow away. Perhaps the most blatant example is this gradient. The middle bar is simply one color. Remove the background gradient and it becomes obvious. Once again, the darkness of the background has affected our perception of the bar's color. Our perception is relative. So, do you still trust your eyes? Got a burning question?
So hopefully you got to see those. If you just hear me talking right now and you did see videos, they made me cut them, and you can go to Canvas and I'll give you the links for them. All right, moving on to last myth. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. There's something called neurosexism. A lot of people want to explain why men and women are different because our brains are very different. And I've actually done a 180 on this. I teach human sexuality and I talk about gender. And I came into it thinking, no, men and women's brains are really different. And the more I researched, I think it's society that really makes some differences. Now, we live in a gendered world. So if you're given Legos all day to play with and you're given dollies from a young age, that will change your brain. So when we look at 40-year-old brains, maybe they are different. But how much of that is innate? How much is nature and how much is nurture? So there are some differences because there's difference in every organ system, but it's really hard to say how different we are. I think there's quite a few similarities. Let's just do that. We will talk about it later. All right. Let's look at the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and we divide it into anatomical divisions and functional divisions, but just some terms. The cerebrum is the main part of the brain. When you look at the squiggy little thing that you're looking at, that's going to be the hemispheres, the two halves, and the cortex is the outer part. Cortex means bark. So whenever you hear cortex, it's going to be on the outside. So the cerebrum there. Cerebellum means little brain. So that is the cerebellum. That's about 11% of the weight of the brain, but 50% of the neurons of the pathways. That's going to be for movement, coordination, posture. Brain stem goes down here, and then it leads to the spinal cord. How it's organized. You don't have to know all these terms, but, and don't worry, I'm getting ahead of myself, so don't panic that you don't have this right now in your notes. But we have the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain, that's going to be your cortex and basal ganglia. Don't worry about diencephalon and telencephalon, those terms. We'll talk about the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary, pineal. We'll talk about the midbrain, and then your hindbrain is the cerebellum, pons, and medulla. So I just have this slide to look at the words in white. Those are the areas we will talk about. But when we're looking at a brain, so this is the cortex of the cerebrum that we're looking at. Cortex is the outermost part, and it's all folded, it's all wrinkly. This is the largest part. If you were to just spread out this outer portion, it would be about the size of a full page of newspaper. And there's a whole bunch of folds in there. And the reason you have folds, which is why you always have folds, it increases surface area. And about 2/3 of the surface of the brain is hidden down in your grooves. And the folding is very individual. And you can see different conditions are associated with different folding. So people with autism and schizophrenia and ADHD have different folds, and depression too. And when you learn something, it's different parts of your brain pulling together. We would talk about that in neuroscience if you ever want to take that. So the gyri, those are the elevated ridges. And we do name a couple of them, and I will like you to know a couple names. This red line right here is the central sulcus. A sulcus is an invagination. What's another word for that? That's where it goes in. So that's a little, a valley. So this is called the central sulcus. In front of it, this lump of tissue, this ridge is called the pre-central gyrus, and the one behind it is called the post-central gyrus. Pre-central gyrus, that's for motor, voluntary movement. Post-central gyrus, that is sensation of touch. So the sulci, that's the invagination, the furrows or the grooves. This one right here is the central sulcus. And it's not exactly the same in everybody, but it's pretty much right there down the center, separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Here's temporal lobe and occipital lobe. We'll get to that. Lateral sulcus separates frontal from temporal and parietal. Fissures, those are the deeper grooves. The longitudinal fissure separates the left and the right half of the brain, and the transverse fissure separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. Okay, and I don't think those in your notes. I don't think I'm going to ask it, so don't worry. Gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is cell bodies, dendrites, and some glial cells. That's mostly what you see on the outside of the brain. White matter, that's the axons. And they look white, they literally look white because they're covered in myelin, which is that fatty substance. So on the outside is going to be the cell bodies and the dendrites, and then leading into the center of the brain and then down through the spinal cord, that's going to be your white matter, which is the fibers, the axons. What connects the two halves of the brain? There's a few things that connect it, but one of the main ones is called the corpus callosum, and it's going to connect the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. It's a whole bunch of fibers. I love this image, a bunch of different fibers connecting the left and right half of the brain. And the hemispheres are contralateral. What that means is generally, not for everything, but generally the right hemisphere controls the left side of your body. Left hemisphere controls right side of your body. It tends to be contralateral. And some differences between left and right hemisphere. You may have taken a BuzzFeed quiz or something. Am I left brain or right brain? It's not as clear cut, and it's not left or right as they like you to believe. We all have some left and some right ability. Left hemisphere tends to be speech, verbal abilities, reading and writing, and some computational skills. Right hemisphere tends to be more creative, spatial perception. Can you see how things rotate in space? Art and music, recognizing faces is more right hemisphere, having an intuition and emotions. So that we tend to see that, but it's not nearly that. You can't say just because you're verbal, you're left hemisphere, because left hemisphere is knowing the words for things, but right hemisphere is understanding tone of voice. So if I'm not mad, if I said that, your left hemisphere says, oh good, she's not mad. Your right hemisphere says, oh dear, let me give you chocolate. Because you know I'm mad from the tone of voice. So when you just say language is left hemisphere, it's not that clear cut. Now there does seem to be some gender differences. Women tend to be less hemisphere specific and use both sides of the brain a little bit more. Men tend to be more left or right brain. When men have a stroke in the left hemisphere, which is more language, they're more likely to lose the ability to speak. Women with a stroke in the left hemisphere are better able to use the other half of the brain, the right hemisphere, and are less likely to lose language. What I'll close this one out with, so if I am not allowed to use this video, I'll just end it early. Roger Sperry, and I have some trivia. Roger Sperry won the Nobel Prize in 1981, and Roger Sperry went to my high school way before I did. Thank you very much. But he went to my high school, Hall High, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1981 for his work with cutting the corpus callosum for severe epilepsy. So severe epilepsy, when a seizure stays on one side of the brain, you don't lose consciousness, but when it hops from one hemisphere to the other, you lose consciousness, and a tonic-clonic seizure can be quite dangerous. And some people just do not respond to drugs or any other treatment. And so for the really intractable, can't do it for anything else, he severed the corpus callosum. So the signal, the seizure couldn't hop from one side of the brain to the other side of the brain. And so the people didn't have the seizures anymore, but left brain and right brain no longer communicated with each other. So let me just show you this video.
Left hemisphere and right hemisphere now are working independent of each other, but you don't notice it. Now you just kind of adapt to it. You don't have any feeling different than it did before.
7 years ago, Joe had brain surgery to allay the effects of severe epilepsy. His surgeon cut the nerve fibers connecting his left hemisphere with his right. While the operation was a complete success, Joe's unusual case offers an extraordinary insight into the machinery of mind.
So it hasn't really made any.
This fiber system, the corpus callosum, is located midway between the two hemispheres. When it was surgically severed in Joe's brain, the transmission of information between the two hemispheres was halted. Michael Gazzaniga.
What we can do is play tricks by putting information into his disconnected, mute, non-talking right hemisphere and watch it produce behaviors. And out of that, we can really see that there is, in fact, a reason to believe that there's all kinds of complex processes going on outside of his conscious awareness of his left half brain. Joe, I'm going to show you some things. I just want you to tell me what you see. And here we go. You ready? Look right at the dot.
Okay.
Right. Okay, you ready? Look right at the dot.
Grapes.
Good. When Joe focuses on a point,
Right at the dot.
everything to the right of the point goes to his left brain, the dominant hemisphere for language and speech.
Look right at the dot.
So we can see here that when we flash a word or a picture,
See.
Joe is easily able to name it.
Here we go.
See it.
Close your eyes and let your left hand do a little work here. Okay, what do you got there?
Pan.
Okay, very good. Now, when a word or a picture falls to the left of a fixation point, that information goes to his disconnected right half brain. And as we can see here, Joe is unable to name it. Joe is able to draw the picture with his left hand, the left hand getting its major control from the right half brain. What do you draw?
Okay.
What do you see?
Wheel on one side. I don't know what I saw on the other.
So even though he can't name it, his left hand is able to draw out the picture of the stimulus of the picture or word that we presented to his right half brain. What did you see?
So, hammer.
So just close your eyes and draw with your left hand. Just let it go. It's nice. What's that?
Saw.
Yeah. What'd you see?
Hammer.
What'd you draw that for?
I don't know.
What we have with Joe is just a dramatic example of a neurologic case that really allows you this window into the non-conscious and how powerful non-conscious processes are at influencing our conscious self, our personal self. What Joe and patients like him, and there are many of them, teaches us is that the mind is made up of a constellation of independent, semi-independent agents, and that these agents, these processes can carry on a vast number of activities outside of our conscious awareness. Even though that goes on, there's some final stage or some final system, which I happen to think is in the left hemisphere, that pulls all of this information together into a theory. It has to generate a theory to explain all of these independent elements. And so, and that theory becomes our particular theory of ourself and of the world.
So hopefully you got to see that video. If not, I cut it out and I will have a link for it on Canvas, but I will still explain what's going on here. All right, so we've severed the corpus callosum. If you show and have somebody stare straight ahead, if you show a word to the right, on the right side goes to the left visual field, it goes to the left brain, and you ask them what they saw, they will say spoon. They can do that because left hemisphere is more speech. If you have it on the left here and it goes to the right brain and you ask them, what word did you say? They can't say it. They can't say spoon. They'll say, I don't know, or I didn't say anything. They will say that they didn't see it. But what you then have them do is feel with their left hand, which is controlled by the right brain got the word spoon, but can't say spoon, and have them feel a whole bunch of objects, they will pick up a spoon because they can recognize it by feel in the left hand, which is controlled by the right brain, which saw the word, but can't say the word. So it's just cool. So if we're looking at this image and we have our corpus callosum severed, you're looking at the dot. And if you have a person say, "What do you see?" they'll say man, because this goes to it's crossed. This goes to the left brain. They will say man. If you have them point to a picture or draw with their left hand what they saw, they'll pick out the face of a woman, because this goes to the right brain, which is better at facial recognition, and they'll pick out the face of a woman. We'll close it out with that.